Hi, Misha here, and it's time to talk about some more Soviet Russian helicopters. In fact, the first ones, in a way. In my Mi-8 or Mi-17 video, I mentioned it's very difficult to find 1/72 scale die-cast models of Russian choppers. I finally broke down and picked up a Mi-1 from Amercom and a Mi-2 from Altaya, and I thought we would talk about the history and also compare these. These are both, let's call them budget or economy models. The one is a little more expensive than the other, and I'll talk about if it's kind of worth the extra money or not. But first, of course, history, because I love history. And this is definitely not the second time I'm recording this video, because I definitely didn't grab the wrong model the first time and record the entire video with the wrong model on the table. Nope, that definitely never happened. The Mi-1 was the first helicopter to go into mass production in the Soviet Union. It was primarily the brainchild of Mikhail Mil, who had been interested in rotary wing aircraft since the 1930s. Gyrocopters and the like were popular then, but of course the Great Patriotic War, World War II, happened, so his plans were put on hold. But as soon as the war was over, he got back to work in 1946, really working on what would directly become this design. By 1947, he had a design laid out he called the GM-1, and it was being designed at the Moscow Bureau. And on September 20th of 1948, his prototype took to the air for the first time. This was designed as a light utility, light transport helicopter. It had a piston engine, but it was actually pretty advanced for the late 1940s. It entered into state trials in 1949, and despite some rocky starts and actually a couple of crashes, they still felt the good outweighed the bad, and so it was put into low rate production and kind of, and nominally put into Soviet military service. Then in 1951, it was renamed to the Mi-1. It was shown to Stalin, who was impressed. So with his endorsement, this went into full-rate production, and then was later revealed to the public. Just as a side note, in 1954, and these were produced at more than one factory, but in 1954, these went into production in the city of Orenburg, which is where I used to live, and also where Yuri Gagarin went to flight school. Apropos of nothing. But yeah. The initial version, Mi-1, had one pilot and a crew, up to 2 passengers. Or it could carry around 500 pounds of cargo instead of 2 passengers. It was very quickly replaced in production by the Mi-1T, which had a better radio, more instruments for the pilot, had an improved engine, more reliable engine, had more durable rotor blades. And this would be the kind of the standard production version for a time. In 1957 early, it would be joined by the Mi-1A, which had further improvements and a still more reliable engine. It was also the first one that was capable of accepting an external fuel tank. But then late that year, the Mi-1M would be introduced, and this was kind of the definitive version. It went to a new engine. It was still a piston engine, but it was a much more powerful engine. Also, the cabin was slightly increased, and the bench seat behind the pilot went from 2 to 3 passengers, and it was able to lift at least 600 pounds, maybe a little more, in cargo. This would pretty much be the final version to go into mass production in Russia. However, actually what this model is of the Mi-1MU, which was a proposed attack version that had armament. Before that, it really had none, or at most maybe a machine gun could have been put on ad hoc, but this was the first one they considered arming with rockets and early anti-tank missiles. While it was tested, it was never put into production. It would have been the Soviet Union's first attack chopper, but that would have to wait a few more years. The aircraft was just under 40 feet long, not counting rotors and such. It had a max speed of about 110 to 115 miles per hour. A maximum altitude of around at 11,500 feet. And for being a first generation rotorcraft was actually quite good. In 1956, licensed production was set up in Poland. So when the Soviets would stop making these around 1961, the Poles would continue production until 1965, by which point just shy of 2,600 Mi-1s had been built. Now, to the U.S. Air Force or Department of Defense, this was known as the Type 32, and to NATO, this was known as the Hare. They tended to give Russian helicopter names starting with H. So this was known as the Hare. It was one of Mikhail Mills' very first successes and kind of proof that a helicopter could be a viable military asset. But it was relatively limited, with the biggest limitation being its piston engine. The mill, Mi-2, U.S. Air Force DoD name of Type 36, more commonly known under the NATO reporting name of Hoplite. After the final versions of the Mi-1 were in production, Mill and his team turned to using a turbine-driven engine, a turboshaft helicopter. This gave several advantages, including a smaller engine, much more powerful, more reliable, generally speaking, and so on. So they essentially took the Mi-1, took the piston engine out, and then went to the turbine, which allowed them to have a larger cabin, but at the same time basically keeping the dimensions the same. The helicopter itself was physically heavier, but it had 40% more lift capability, which is very important for a helicopter. Of course, this is still considered a light utility, but a heavier light utility. It would first fly on September 22nd, 1961, and did well. However, in the early 60s, most of the factories in the Soviet Union proper were busy. And since Poland had been producing the Mi-1 successfully for a number of years, the decision was made to transfer the Mi-2 design to PZL for them to produce it. And this is pretty revolutionary. This doesn't happen often where a Russian design is given to an ally to produce. But it happened. So the Russian prototype, along with everything to build more, was transferred to Poland in 1964. And on November 4th of 1965, a Polish assembled example took to the air, and then full-rate production commenced immediately. And this would be adopted by the Soviet military, but also the civil aviation was interested. In fact, one of the big drivers behind the Mi-2 was Aeroflot, who needed just such a helicopter for its own purposes. Passenger transport as well as construction and so on and so forth. What do we have here? Well, we're actually a little bit shorter at 37.5 feet. But we have a much larger cabin. We can carry up to 8 people, or over 1,500 pounds cargo inside, or up to 1,700 pounds cargo underslung. It also could mount pods on the side. You could carry injured people to a hospital in capsules. You could also have stretchers inside. Being an air ambulance was one of its critical roles. It also could be armed. Unlike the Mi-1, this became routine. It could have a 23mm cannon, 57mm dumbfire rockets. It could have machine guns. It could even be armed with some early missiles like the Strela. The attack version was mostly used by East Germany and Poland itself, but Russia had a few. But really, Russia wanted this more as a utility helicopter than an attack helicopter. Between 1965 and 1998, so quite a long production run, just under 5,500 of these were built. So very successful for what it was. Even though this had a much larger payload than the one, it was a little bit faster at about 120 miles per hour max speed, and it had a little better max altitude at 13,000 feet. So a very successful jump into the world of turboshaft helicopters. Got a neat design. I definitely like the look of the Mi-2 a little more than the one. A little more refined. Well, as promised, what about this Altaya model versus this Amercom model? Okay, positives for the Amercom. Very inexpensive. $17, give or take. sometimes a 21, but yeah. And that includes a little stand. And they do have rotating blades. If you get some of their aircraft, they have rotating wheels. They even sometimes have pilot figures, although I don't think this one does. It seems like with their helicopters, they don't typically have pilots. It's more their planes. They have pretty good paint jobs, from what people have told me. And they are die-cast. They have a reasonable amount of metal. Of course, the smaller, the less. And they make an Mi-2. But I went with the Altaya. These cost more. They're about $30 to $35. So, about 50% more. They also come with the stand. They also have rotating propellers. Is it worth it? Yes. Well, Altaya uses the same basic tooling as Amercom. They're just a little better. These are both economy models, so don't expect the world. These are not Corgi or Hobby Master. Not even Falcon, honestly. But the stand is better. It has this very wide base with two very firm plugs, whereas the Amercom stand is actually a lot like a Hobby Master. It has a small little block that plugs in. This model, it sits pretty well. Some I've had, they do, some they don't. Like my H13 Sioux doesn't want to stay on the stand. They both have about the same ratio of plastic to metal, but it feels like the plastic that Altaya uses is a little better. It has a little more flex to it. It's a little less brittle. It also feels a little thicker, just a little more resilient. While I don't mind the Amercoms, the plastic isn't as durable as I would like. But really what bugs me about the Amercom are the little rotor blades. You plug them on and they want to fall off, and they tend to be a little uneven. I mean, nothing bad for the money, and you could probably straighten it out, but like these I stuck on with blue tack because they just kept wanting to fall off. At least two of them did. Of course, you can always glue them, which will probably ultimately be what I do. But I haven't really had that trouble with the Altaya. Their rotors seem to be pretty good. Now watch it break as soon as I say that. But I haven't had really any trouble getting them on. They usually pop right in. And, knock on wood, stay on pretty well. So take that as you will. Maybe I've just had better luck with them, but they just seem to have that little bit of extra care in the polymer mix. But they do cost more, and they're not always as easy to find, but they have a very interesting range. They do some pretty neat combat helicopters, which you'll be seeing here as I do more videos, but yeah. My opinion is, if Altaya makes what you want, I would spend the extra money. Their QC seems to just be a little tighter. I've just accepted the fact with Amercom that sometimes you might have to buy two to really end up with one that's nice. This one's my first and only so far in Mi-1, but for example, my Hup-2 Retriever, the first one I got was just not put together well. I tried to glue it and do this and that, and eventually I just said, this is stupid. I'm spending more time than what it would cost to just get another one, so I just got another one, and it's fine. But I've kind of noticed that just, if you buy a few of them, you might have to end up with another one. Now, I will say that, knock on wood, I haven't had one come in broken in the packaging. These both come in very basic packaging, just like little blister packs. So don't expect nice looking packaging. It's disposable packaging, which is fine by me. I don't keep my boxes. And it's one way they save money. I would much rather have the stand in crap packaging than nice packaging and no stand. But yeah, I would buy the Altaya if they make what you want, but if they don't, and it's just kind of a place filler, the Amercom models are fine. They do some neat ones, like I did a video recently on the P-26 pea shooter, the Boeing. No one else does a 172 die-cast pea shooter. Actually, they also do a very nice Mi-163 Comet. I would say arguably better than Oxford or Atlas. Certainly on par, and cheaper. I've actually had better luck with their planes than their helicopters, and I think it's just because planes are a little more straightforward. Helicopters have more bits and bobs, sticky out parts, thin pieces, and that just kind of leads to trouble with their plastic mix. So I've been giving them a little more chance, and with that in mind, expecting them to have to replace one now and again, I'm fine. But I've been actually pretty dang surprised with the Altaya. So we'll see if that happiness continues or not. Any questions or comments? Please post them below. I surely appreciate you tuning in. And if you could, check out some of my other videos. Hopefully I got something on camera this time for you folks. This is Misha, and I will catch you very soon. Next time.